I'm Matt Cromwell. I'm the lead admin at the Advanced WordPress Facebook group and head of support at GiveWP. And this is our Gutenberg interview series, the last one that we're doing for the month of February. And we have a very honored and special guest today. Matt Mullenweg is here. Thanks so much for being here, Matt.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah. Glad to cap off what an illustrious group you've had here. It's been really awesome.
Been really fortunate. Yeah, it's been a really nice setup overall. I'm really glad that Tammy was able to be here last week. She was great and got some different perspectives from everybody about Gutenberg. That's what we're talking about today. The whole series has been all about Gutenberg because it's coming up, and there's no one better to talk about it really than Matt. So again, thanks for being here. Let's jump right into the questions because I want to keep my questions to a minimum so we have time for the Ask Me Anything, the AMA at the end, because I know our members have lots of questions. First off, Matt, you really need no introduction to our members. Everybody knows who you are, but I'd really love to get a little bit of context on who you are a little bit. You now run $1 billion company, really, that started as a simple open source project. And I'm sure as much as the company and the project has changed over the years, you have personally as well. How do you describe yourself as a business leader, really? Or how do you think of yourself as the leader of the Gutenberg project specifically?
Well, it depends on the day a little bit. I do wear a lot of hats in sort of my professional and personal lives. And you mentioned one of them, which is in 2005, I founded a company called Automattic, which is a large contributor to WordPress. The big things we're known for is WordPress.com, Jetpack, and WooCommerce. And some of the early kind of inspirations for the JavaScript and API-driven idea that became Gutenberg had its roots in things like Calypso, and even prior to that, some APIs that we did on WordPress.com. And before that, though, in 2003, co-founded WordPress with Mike Little, and I've been loving and doing that ever since. I haven't led a core release prior to. Well, the last big thing I led was probably MP6, which was making the admin mobile responsive, flattening the graphics so it was more vector-based, faster to load, more accessible. That was a project that at the time was very controversial, but I think now we can look back and say it was really, really positive and necessary for WordPress. And I think we'll look back at Gutenberg the same way. Like, there's a little bit of controversy, more when we started, less so now. But we'll look back a few years from now and be like, this was absolutely necessary for WordPress's continued evolution and us being really relevant and growing over the next decade.
Nice. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, MP6 was excellent. And wasn't it also MP6 basically like the first real test run of having a plugin as feature that got merged into core? Was that the first one?
It was. Yeah, there's really only been two that have gone super well. Probably the API and MP6. But I see people saying that you're really soft as well, so it might not just be me that's hearing you softly.
Yeah, that's what folks are saying. Check. Anybody? Does that sound better? Hopefully. I got a lot.
It's getting louder, yeah.
Okay, I got a lot of space for volume, so thanks,
Cool.
everybody.
Yeah, I've got you all the way cranked, so.
Okay. All right. Hopefully, I got a couple of folks on standby too, or Tony. Taco, for example, he's telling me how I'm doing.
Cool.
I think we're good. More bass. All right.
More cowbell?
More cowbell. Cool. Let's go to the next question. Regarding Gutenberg, I'd love to hear some background. What made you want to focus on the editing publishing experience in WordPress specifically? Was there like an aha moment or a specific event that made you want to tackle this directly?
It's really almost any user test that you watch. So both watching people brand new to WordPress, I think is very, very informative in how they navigate and struggle with the editor, but also just watching people who've been developing WordPress sites full time, 5 or 10 years, developing 100 sites a year, and just watching how they used the editor, or maybe more often didn't use the editor. They were in code mode all the time, or they were having clients learn very complicated shortcodes, or just kind of like hiding the editor entirely. It became obvious that both we could make something that was more accessible to new users, but also a lot more powerful for like our developer community. and they're our users, the developers, clients, would be able to do things so much easier. Kind of the advanced kind of things with custom post types and meta boxes and everything that people were hacking around, and like a very scrappy way, very MacGyver-like, but that there's a better interface for it, and we could allow people to essentially like build these little applications on top of core WordPress without needing 5 or 10 plugins, spending a ton of money on other stuff, and having a lot of code that wasn't going to be forward compatible, which is something I think about a lot. Because again, those users, the clients, it's always been something very big in the WordPress kind of ethos, is that they have rights as well. They should be able to switch themes or upgrade WordPress without everything breaking. And so I think our developer community has always been really good, our builder community, about building things in a future compatible way. And so we wanted to, but that had gotten harder over the years. If you want to do this more advanced functionality, like you're really locking the site into one of these plugins or themes. Yeah. We had these kind of like Franken themes that did like a million things.
No, exactly. Mentioning backward compatibility, that has been kind of an evolving topic with Gutenberg for a bit. How are you feeling about backward compatibility with Gutenberg at this point?
I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, it depends on, there's kind of two sides. Like if someone clicks upgrade, will everything keep working? That's actually not too hard to do, because we can just kind of turn Gutenberg off if they have something that we think is going to break it, either that we know or that a plugin is registering a certain way. That's obviously not ideal, though. It's backwards compatible, but they're not getting the latest and greatest. So a lot of our focus has been, outreach to the plugin community, to the developer community, to kind of show them how they can take advantage of all the new stuff that's happening with Gutenberg. So it's really more of a community problem than or challenge than a technical challenge. So that when people click that upgrade, everything they use has already been kind of upgraded to be Gutenberg compatible. And they're just getting this magical new experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Related to that, this kind of a follow-up question regarding the REST API. A few years ago, you mentioned how you really wanted the REST API in core when it could do everything in the WordPress admin. Is this kind of similar? Is that maybe Gutenberg is able to kind of pave the way for everything to be controlled in the admin over the REST API? Are these overlapping goals in some way?
Yeah, well, I think one thing we've learned in Gutenberg was that an API that we kind of thought was complete, we weren't going to bring in, like, say, the posting API and stuff like that if we didn't think it was complete. Turns out it wasn't complete. So we really have had a fair amount of work we need to do on the REST API in addition to Gutenberg. So, I mean, hindsight is 20/20. My argument was that let's not bring in something unless we're using it ourselves to power the actual interface, because otherwise, when other people try to build on this thing we say is complete, they're going to get stuck just like we did. Now, it's okay if we get stuck because we're core developers, so we can just fix it right there. But other people will probably hit that wall and just turn around and switch to either like a different plugin or maybe even different CMS, or like something like Contentful, which is like an API-only driven CMS. So I do believe that we did, in hindsight, we might have oversold the API a little bit, saying it was this complete and done thing when in fact it still has a lot of work left to do. And but we're doing it. I mean, it's in now. We're trying to make it as successful as possible, and I would say for posting and customization, we'll have very, very good coverage. And over time, as we kind of update the rest of the admin to be JavaScript and API driven, I'm sure we'll find some more gaps and holes.
Yeah. Nice.
And for future APIs, I will definitely hold a harder line there. There was a lot of community consensus, to be honest, on the API coming in. I guess that was end of 2016, and thinking it was complete. And the team really kind of said it was complete. So that's what we did. But we hadn't actually had the things built on it to demonstrate that completeness.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. I asked Tammy this question last week, and I'd love to hear your response too. The responses from the WordPress community about Gutenberg have been very mixed, at least in certain bubbles of the WordPress community. There's been some really great praise, some excitement, but also some very harsh reactions as well, like Gutenberg's going to ruin WordPress for forever. How do you respond to those types of criticisms in general?
I think the first thing you do is you just listen, because when people are expressing that strong emotion, that they're not making it up. There's no Russian bots talking about Gutenberg. It's all real people. And so I really just try to understand what they're scared of and what their worry is. And there definitely have been a few buckets of things thus far. People worried about clients upgrading, people worried about having to rewrite plugins, people concerned about things they've written before not working at all. I think partially because early versions of Gutenberg just hid meta boxes. They didn't, put them below. So people just assumed that Gutenberg wouldn't show them at all, which was never the intention. But I could totally see where if you'd used a plugin, you would think that. In fact, I talked to the team. I was like, hey, can we just put a placeholder there that says meta boxes will go here in the future, just so people know that we haven't forgotten or aren't deciding not to do it. So, sorry, I'm in a WeWork, so it's a little noisy here.
No,
but
I'm in downtown San Diego. We get lots of noise out there.
So that was just, you kind of dig in and see what's going on. And then we use that to inform the iteration process. And as many people have noticed, Gutenberg is moving probably faster in terms of like its development pace than anything I can remember in the past 5 or 10 years in WordPress. It's really iterating at a fast pace, which means that we're able to incorporate even sometimes big feedback or direction changes pretty quickly. And I've been happy, like the reviews and things. If you try 0.6 and I thought it was terrible, now I'm on 1.4. I think it's fantastic, and so we just really want to continue that, because that's kind of the whole idea. It's like work all these bugs before it's in core.
Yeah, for sure. Related to that, how are you feeling about an inclusion date at this point? April was tossed around a bit, but that feels really soon at this point. What are you thinking in that regard?
It's when it's ready. So, closer. It depends on when it's. That's really the only thing driving it. We talked about April in the past as it was kind of like a when it was ready idea. The big fact, Yoast talked this in his interview, was as we get this into wider testing, what bugs we run into. In many ways, I've been using Gutenberg for a few months. Many folks are. Thousands of people are like posting anything really. So that's ready. But, there's a long tail of browsers and different issues and other plugins and things that we want to try to get as robust as possible before kind of deploying into core and shipping to tens of millions of sites. So we shall see as we get more into that wider testing phase, which is coming up pretty soon. What's going to be the feedback? And luckily we have we have a very active folks like Advanced AWP that have been great about testing things out, and I hope we'll continue to test things out as they get further along. We also have a collection of perhaps unwilling beta testers, which is WordPress.com users that we can test some of this stuff on. It's a SaaS service, so we can kind of turn it on incrementally for kind of portions of the user base or things like that, and just see what happens. And that should be fantastic, because that is, many, many millions of users. So, edge case should pop up pretty quickly. And it has 24/7 live chat support and stuff like that. So, like, in that kind of phase of testing, we'll be able to kind of have a very, very tight feedback loop with users.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So it gets on, and then they have the live chat there in case they have any issues whatsoever.
Yeah.
Nice. Is there a planned rollout?
And then the happiness engineers can triage the issues, roll them up, file them into GitHub, things like that. So, it should be pretty interesting. Is there a planned rollout?
For the .com part, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that it is a step before. I kind of want to beta test it there, or force beta it there, in kind of in parallel to the .org push, because we haven't really been pushing tons of people to do it. We're saying developers, please try it now. In fact, start building for it now. But But for users, we're not trying to get really mass testing because we know what the issues are right now. So we're just kind of working our way through our known issues. We're not yet to the unknown unknowns.
Yep, absolutely.
But for relatively, it's coming up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I just don't want to say any dates because it's soft and you never know. And I do want people to really internalize that we're going to do this when it's ready. We're not trying to hit some specific date just to hit a date,
Yeah.
We're really looking at the quality of the software and the user experience as being the primary driving force.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Folks, we are going to ask questions right here on the Facebook thread. Jason Coleman already started with a question, and we're going to get to that. I have my last question, and then we're going to start doing the AMA portion. So if you have questions, start adding them there to the Facebook thread now, and I'll be able to highlight them on the screen, and Matt will be able to make it happen. So my last question is, you laid out 3 phases for Gutenberg adoption: editor, customizer, and theme. Will you be overseeing each of those phases directly like you are now, or what's your grand vision for the admin experience in 2 or 3 years from now? Those are kind of 2 separate questions, but how much of this are you kind of yourself really going to be driving? I know you're a big driving force for it right now, but are you going to also be heavily involved with the other phases as well?
I'm sticking around, so I'm going to see this through to the very, very end. And but I think it's also important to recognize that, I would say the day-to-day drivers are really folks like Matthias, Tammy, Yoan, Weston, Mel. These kind of folks who are the leads for the different areas have just been doing the most incredible work. And that's even not to mention, I feel bad I mentioned names because I'm leaving out 20 people who are also super, super active. Great contributions from Yoast and XWP, and the chats are great. The phases, though, I think are important to understand. So I'm just going to repeat that, even though it was kind of in the question. Right now, everything we're doing is phase 1 of Gutenberg. So that's saying we're going to replace the editor with this block-based new API-driven interface. But the blocks are kind of the most magical thing. That's what gets it really exciting. Because then once we have these blocks in the editor, we think actually way faster than Gutenberg took, we can bring them to other parts. So the next step is saying, can we replace widgets and menus with blocks? So essentially those become blocks. And you can kind of lay out your sidebar, your footer areas, in the future, your entire theme with these blocks. So it becomes a lot more like you're kind of building your sites, your post, your page from these primitives, and they're the same no matter where you are, right? So if you want to put a list of most recent posts, cool. That's a widget now. But if you want to put that below, the contact form on your about page, that's just a block. So it's going to get way, way easier for users who right now have kind of these conceptually similar concepts, but completely different interfaces, code bases, and in fact, functionality throughout WordPress. So that's phase 2, is what we're calling kind of customization, is kind of bringing blocks to replace things in the customizer, principally widgets and menus. And phase 3, although it'll probably happen pretty concurrently, is a theme to really highlight all that. So maybe it's a 2019 theme, it's the one that is going to be the next default. That really kind of just shows off all you can do. It's actually so impressive, the things you can now do in core with Gutenberg that was just literally impossible before. I mean, you just couldn't do it without really writing custom HTML and CSS or something. And now it's possible, as I think you pointed out, it's possible without even leaving the keyboard. We've got these keyboard shortcuts and searches, and it's you can really fly in this thing. Which I think for super advanced users, we're in the advanced WordPress group here, you're gonna be able to do things so much faster than you did in the past, and it'll be more robust, more compatible, more plugins will work with it, more themes will work with it. And so that's the 3 phases, and I think we'll be able to do all 3 of those phases this year.
Nice. That sounds great. I think personally, I'm really excited for it. I think it's gonna be a great time. So thanks for your answers there. I hope that laid the foundation for everybody in terms of just giving context to everything. We're going to jump into the AMA questions. So let's start with Jason
Wow, a lot
Cole.
coming in.
Yeah, we'll see how far we get in. Jason Coleman says, "If my question would be, is it too hard to add new blocks? Specifically, do you imagine it would or should be possible to add blocks with only PHP code?"
I'll try to go through these quickly just to like keep it moving, but I personally don't think it's too hard to add new blocks. So I guess my answer would be no.
Yeah, there's also a lot of tutorials out there currently as well right now. Spencer Labadie says,
There's a separate thing though, is could it be easier? I don't know. You know, it's one of those things. We could maybe add different methods, but at a cost of perhaps actually complexity down the road. So I think right now is the best balance of like code and developer and user complexity.
Nice. Spencer Labadie says, "Is Automattic working on any newer plugins for the .org repo that will be utilizing Gutenberg? And secondly, are you looking forward to being at WordPress Camp next month?" I'm not sure what one that is, but
probably, and I think it's announced, but I'm going to be at Miami.
Oh, nice.
So that might be the one he's referring to. So, you know, the Miami, I mean, they're celebrating their 10th year, and they have been so excellent. They were the first WordCamp to do like a Learn JavaScript Deeply track. It's just been really fantastic. David and the organizers there, I think, have run one of the best WordCamps. So that's why I wanted to. It's a little tricky. I think I have to fly in for just like 24 hours, but I'm gonna make it there.
Nice. I'll see you there.
Our new plugins, there's going to be Gutenberg support in WooCommerce. There's going to be Gutenberg support in Jetpack. Those are the two big ones that Automattic makes. And if there's any others, they'll get to Guten support sooner rather than later. Yeah, we're definitely eating the dog food there.
Nice, cool.
This is very
Ahmad.
fancy how the questions go on.
Yeah, I like it. That's just one reason why I picked this platform. It's nice and convenient for this format. Ahmad, he's one of our admins. He was interviewed a couple weeks ago. He says, with React and Gutenberg, it makes sense to adopt GraphQL as well. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I almost wonder if we should have skipped REST API and gone straight to GraphQL. Well, we'll see. That's not on the kind of near term because we're really focused on this this user side of it right now. But down the road, yeah, maybe something like GraphQL could be a good kind of 2019 focus.
Nice. I'm going to go to somebody else. Justin and Ahmad already asked some questions. They have a lot of questions, though. Let me see.
Great.
Well, here's should we allow Jeff Chandler to ask a question? Is that okay?
Sure.
There are some concerns that we raised about deprecating the Gutenberg name once it's merged into core. Is Gutenberg a project that will exist on its own after being merged into core to be used by other projects and integrated into other places, or will the name be deprecated?
We'll see. I don't think that's the most important thing to figure out right now. We're tackling some much bigger issues. So we'll see. If the plugin's useful, it'll keep around. For example, to beta test, like some new enhancements, or maybe to do some of the customization stuff, then yeah, we'll keep it around. If not, we'll just have it sort of turn itself off and I'll upgrade.
Nice.
The name we're definitely stuck with. I mean, people use it now. I don't think it won't say like Gutenberg instead of edit in the admin interface. That wouldn't make any sense. But just like we have names for things that will be invisible to users, like Tide or Gutenberg, or a lot of the stuff that we do, it's useful to have kind of a word that refers to something specifically for folks like us who are like discussing development and actually doing development and things, even if we never really expose that to users.
Yeah, maybe background of his question is maybe similar to MP6. Nobody really calls it MP6 anymore. But either way.
Yeah. Well, but if MP6 had continued as a plugin or as like a way to change things, maybe if we needed more or further experimentation there, it definitely would have continued. It turned out the way it got integrated, it was completely obsoleted by the core.
Yep. True.
But this, I think, is a little meatier.
Oh, for sure. Yep. Great. Stanislav is another AWP admin. He says, with Gutenberg, WordPress is taking a leap towards more complex editing. How do you see balancing the site building experience versus the content creation experience? With the introduction of columns, isn't there a risk of becoming too difficult for beginners to use for most people, or who just want to author content?
I mean, definitely one of the use cases that we look at is just if you want to go to Gutenberg and just start typing like a regular blog post, how is it? And I think it's really good, actually. And I've been doing if you look at a lot of the posts I've been doing with Gutenberg on my own blog, they're not doing any fancy block stuff, really. I think that what is actually going to make it easier than the current editor is that as soon as people started to insert images or do anything that wasn't just text and links in the old editor, it could get very buggy very quickly, and you'd run into some really frustrating user behaviors. I'm sure y'all have seen this, where you're like trying to align an image, but then link it and then move it around, and then there's a caption, and then like your cursor gets stuck somewhere, and you want to move it, but things aren't floating correctly, and like you can really get very frustrating very quickly. And a good way to measure that is just think in your own usage, like how in the current editor, how often do you get stuck and switch to HTML? Then you fix it and you go back, but like there's something that bounces you to HTML. Well, anyone watching this can do that, right? Because you know code. You're in the advanced, not the beginner WP group. But for anyone who doesn't have that sort of capability, they just get stuck or frustrated or copy and paste from someplace else or just give up, you know?
Yeah.
They change what they want to do. And WordPress is always about helping, at best, we help people realize their imaginations. Take something that only exists in their head and put it out to the world. So when they're because of the tool enables, that's a failure on our part. And with Gutenberg, we're going to be able to eliminate any of this.
Yeah, I guess a tangent or related idea there is the WordPress motto has always been democratizing publishing. Are we now democratizing complex publishing or democratizing layout-based publishing? I don't know. I think the question is important, but at the same time, like publishing is different now than it was a long time ago.
I'll tell you a good way to think of it. We want to make the simple things easy and the complex things possible.
I like that.
It's not that's a hard balance, but I think with Gutenberg we're doing it. The simple things are easy. In fact, I actually think they're easier than the old editor because it's a lot more explicit about like how inserting things works and how blocks can interact. And if you have the YouTube in there, it's easier to move around, stuff like that. But then very complex things will be possible, where before they were literally impossible without code or a plugin.
Nice. Next question, Dave McHale. I think I know the answer to this one, but if Gutenberg is deemed not ready, is it possible 5.0 will be released without it? Or will the 5.0 release simply wait for Gutenberg?
So ideally it would be like just a point something, but because it is kind of a kind of headline nice thing to having it be 5.0. What I've said is, which is different from what we've done really in the past, is if there's something major that's ready to go out to the world, we can put it in a 4.9 release. So we don't want to hold like major improvements or big bug fixes or things like that back from the WordPress community. So we might put something that normally would previously go in a more major release in a 4.9 minor release. I'm not aware of anything like that on the deck currently, so it's a little bit more of a theoretical question or possibility than a real one. But it is something I've communicated to all the core devs, and so they know that they're keeping that in mind as well, that we could do a bigger 4.9 update if we needed to.
Nice. Cool. Don Peterson says, any idea if the creators of advanced custom fields will make a plugin for converting content from ACF into Gutenberg blocks? We have hundreds of pages to convert when the time comes. I'm sure you can't speak for the ACF team, but I know there's a lot of conversation around that concept in general going on.
Yeah, I can't speak for them, but I'll speak that it's a really cool team. And so I hope that they are working on something like that, because that would be a huge boon to the community. So consider it a request from me as well. Nice. Thank you, Don.
David Hayes, is there a reason that we can't get some kind of more concrete date other than not April or a clearer set of steps that will be rolled out? It seems like Matt is saying WordPress.com beta, promo to users of .org, then 5.0 release. Is that 5.0 roll-in phase plan without deadlines recorded anywhere?
So I think a good way for folks who want a concrete date, I would say that we will have 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more users of Gutenberg in April. That doesn't mean necessarily a 5.0 release, but it does mean that, you know, if you're planning on sort of aiming for something where a lot of users will be interacting with Gutenberg, and if your stuff doesn't work with it, they might be contacting you, aim for April. That is consistent. So I hope that provides some more concreteness for like plans people want to make, and it's actually been super impressive. Folks like Yoast who are basically, you know, very, very close to being totally Gutenberg ready. So if you haven't started yet, please start it now.
Nice. Yeah, I think part of the question too is related to, you know, what do you consider ready for Gutenberg? Like, is there something super obvious about the feature set or the code base that would say that now it's ready?
We definitely, and on GitHub, there are a number of milestones you can look at in terms of like some things we think are pretty important. You know, one way to put it as well is that it's ready when I'm really happy with it.
Nice.
You know, and it's something that myself and the team are just super proud of, we're pleased with, and I say that this realizes the Gutenberg vision as it was laid out a few years ago. That's when we'll put it out there. And that was one of the big things I talked about when we sort of started this whole thing, is like we're shifting to a when it's ready release cycle, not a date-based one. Now we're going to estimate dates based on what we think there. And like I said before, a lot of the functionality of Gutenberg, especially now that columns are in, actually is ready. So start using it, start playing with it, start building for it. But we're of course not going to put out something buggy, right? Because that would distract from the vision. If we have this like incredible new idea, but it breaks in, you know, 10% of browsers, that'll overshadow.
For sure.
The goodness of, it's kind of like when Yoast did its 3.0, right? They did a ton of great new stuff, but there were some bugs in that rollout with other plugins and interactions and stuff like that that overshadowed all the great new things they did. So we've seen other examples of this in the WordPress and other worlds. So we just need the software to be really, really, really solid. So it's quality driven. Now, could that happen by April? It is a possibility. I don't want to say it's impossible by April. And I know very few other people think that, but I don't think I'm being overly optimistic in saying that it could be. But I will say it is 100% certain that Gutenberg will have a lot more users in April.
Nice. Okay. Roberto Remedios, you think on the future Gutenberg will have drag and drop or columns as the site builders do?
Well, it does have columns already. So drag and drop is fine. I mean, it's a kind of trivial thing to add. It's not really accessible on mobile. It's not really as accessible for like accessibility, like on desktop as well. And it can be a very frustrating experience. So when you think about it, what you're doing when you drag and drop is actually very fine-grained motor control that, you know, advanced users are accustomed to, or ones with like these like super nice Book Pro trackpads. But on like mini computers, mini devices, it's a really tough thing to get exactly right. And then you also get into issues like, how do you drag to a place outside of your viewport? Which I'm sure we've all run into, where you kind of like try to hold it at the top and the page scrolls weirdly. So for these reasons, we think that kind of will definitely have the default and the encouraged thing be this kind of clickable moving. It's keyboard accessible, it's mouse accessible, it's easy on mobile, it's touch accessible, all this. So we'll see.
Yeah, I was
drag and drop stuff already, but there's a few things I actually kind of want to move away from it in some areas. So, for example, we use a lot of sliders right now for like font sizes and things like that. I actually want to move us away from that because, again, it's one of those things where like, to get the exact number you want, it's very fine-grained motor control that like, it's no one's that exact. And, you know, have you ever tried to get like the number 32? It's bouncing between like 31 and 33, and you're like just trying to get it like, we can make that much easier.
Yeah, yeah. I was surprised when I first worked with up and down arrows rather than a drag and drop, how it was really straightforward. I thought it was really straightforward that way. So,
I mean, this is one of the things we don't just want to do what the page building plugins have done. We think we can actually do a step beyond that. Beyond existing WordPress page builders, beyond Wix, beyond Medium, beyond kind of the state of the art in the world right now. We think we can create something better.
Nice. I'm not going to try the name, but he already. Oh wait, that's a comment on a previous question. All right, let's move from there.
What was it in response to?
It was in response to Roberto asking about the drag and drop. Rastislav was saying, yeah, the columns are there already, just like you had mentioned, and he pointed him to the GitHub issue, which is useful.
Cool.
Bobby Wilson says, is WooCommerce working on converting over to use Gutenberg?
Yes. And you can see that. I mean, they're open source, so you can see that on their trackers and code.
Yeah, they have a development blog too, I think, that was mentioning it at one point. Let's see. Taco is here. He's another AWP admin and a member of the Yoast team. He says, what can we, the 30,000 plus users of AWP, do best to help move the Gutenberg project forward? Talk about Gutenberg in our local communities or contribute code. I mean, there's, generally there's a lot of the ways that people can work, but the Facebook group it's a Facebook group. It's limited, but we do have a lot of people here. So how can we help?
Well, specifically for him, you can taco about it as many places as possible. There have been some, presentations at your local meetup group are, I think, fantastic. And also, when you do the presentation, you'll learn a lot about Gutenberg, kind of the latest and greatest. I would say that asking plugin developers to update their plugins for Gutenberg and helping them, or if it's your own plugin, starting that process, is probably the most important thing outside of kind of the core Gutenberg development that can be helped with. Yeah, and then as you do that, as you're updating things to work with Gutenberg, anything you run into, let the team know. I mean, that's one of the questions before was like, in the early days is like, will Yoast SEO work with Gutenberg? And the answer now is like, it's going to super work with Gutenberg because they've been involved with the Gutenberg process. So you're at kind of a unique, for those of you who are developers, particularly plugin developers, we're at kind of the quiet part right now where you can count then, the users of Gutenberg will fit in a stadium. And so you can get access to the developers and really get personal attention on whatever you're running into. At some point, it's going to be the size of a small city, then a large city, and then it's going to get to like Mexico City, Tokyo size in terms of the number of users. At that point, it's going to be a lot harder to get kind of personal attention from the Gutenberg developers. So I would say to the extent, if you're savvy enough to be watching this or listening to this or part of the Advanced WP group, invest the time into becoming fluent and developing on Gutenberg. I mean, today.
Nice. Good question here from William Earnhardt. Mel Choice gave a great talk at LoopConf last week about the possibilities with Gutenberg beyond just basic post content editing. Along those lines, what do you see as the future of the customizer in a post-Gutenberg world?
Yeah, I mean, the customizer gets block support is probably the easiest way to put it. So all these fantastic blocks that we've been creating and the many thousands that plugin developers and theme developers create, imagine those now being available in the customizer. So I just think that'll be so cool. I mean, if you look at like,
I think we lost you for a minute.
Oh, if you look at the user impact of just adding WYSIWYG to the text widget, so simple, right? But with such a huge barrier for so many people, imagine that times 100.
Nice. Karen Gupta, as a WordPress developer who's started to learn JavaScript deeply, would it make more sense to learn React deeply or other frameworks like Vue or Angular?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, go for WordPress relevance, spend most of your time in React. There's not as much. Also, once you've learned one, you kind of have a good sense of the others. So you're not missing anything if you just go React first or React only.
Let's see. Looking for the next good question here. Lots of conversation, which is good.
They want me to trim my beard as the release goes out. That would be pretty funny.
Oh, that's right. Well, you mentioned Gutenberg. Is that what we said?
Yep, Gutenberg.
Nice. How's that coming along?
It's growing on me.
Nice. But you're not reaching. You haven't got it as long as Mark. Mark.
Mark Urain.
Mark Urain. No.
And I've actually had some kind of setbacks where like I would get a haircut. I actually fell asleep while getting a haircut and a trim, and the guy took a good chunk off. So I apologize, but it is really like doing the best I can.
Nice.
My mom hates it.
Oh, that's terrible. I see a lot of good conversation going on. I'm looking for some solid questions. Do you see a question you want to call out, Matt?
Maybe the WordPress plugin director will be a huge bin of Lego/Gutenberg blocks. Yeah, I agree. I see some people answering. Ahmad saying that to work on ES6 and JavaScript design patterns. That's really good. Carl just updated Gravity forums. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carl. Round of applause.
Yeah, I saw they released it as an add-on, a Gravity Forms add-on, like a Gutenberg Gravity Forms add-on for now until Gutenberg gets in core, and then it would go into Gravity Forms core too.
Roberto's question looks good. He says, Gutenberg is a better user experience for regular users, but what about users with vision problems or cognitive problems and all the new options? Yeah, I'll go back to what we said earlier, where we're actually, I think, it feels like we're building a new thing because we've been working on it for like a year and some change, but we're actually going to be simplifying it quite a bit. Because if you imagine the kind of the cognitive leaps and kind of the stuff you had to do before, even just to do something ultra common like embed a YouTube video, and then how that YouTube video would interact with the editor, like if you try to move it, if you try to change it, like all of that's going to be much, much, much simpler now. So I think this should actually be way more accessible, way more intuitive, and way easier for brand new folks. Nice. And that's why we do testing. We do testing with experienced folks and new folks. We do testing at the WordCamps. I think WordCamp US, I forget the number, but it was like 60, 70 people we did user test with. And of course, if you're attending WordCamp US, you're probably a bit savvier. And then on a very, very frequent basis, Tammy, Mel, and others are going through on like a user testing and like recording someone brand new to WordPress. Like, what do you find there? And it's the most humbling thing. This is why I often say, like, I don't have the answers, or the people do. I'm not particularly attached to any one way that Gutenberg does anything, to be honest. It's really much more of an objective. Let's try it, see how it works, and if it doesn't work, try something new. A good example of that is the toolbar. There's some folks in the community feel very strongly that toolbar should always be fixed to the top. We did an experiment where the toolbar is kind of attached to the block. It was like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 where it was attached to the block. The users were able to complete their task better. So it's one of those examples where something that might not be intuitive to us as like WordPress developers actually is overwhelmingly what it turns out that that folks like find the easiest to do.
Justin asked a question earlier, but he's got a good follow-up question here. What is the Gutenberg team doing to make sure bad JavaScript isn't going to break the Gutenberg admin pages? For example, if a plugin is activated and throws errors, would that plugin automatically be deactivated?
That would be awesome if we could do that. So, I mean, it's just code, right? It's not impossible, but that would be a little bit tricky for a number of reasons. It's also been good that more and more plugins, including Yoast SEO, have kind of taken the bullets and arrows for us here already, and that's that being a very popular plugin, and Jetpack as well. And the incompatibilities, if a plugin throws these errors and doesn't work, it's going to break a lot of sites even before Gutenberg ships. It's helpful for us. So I feel like because they were one of the first to do this, they definitely ran into a lot of problems. They've paved the way for everyone else, and including Gutenberg, to really be JavaScript first and core.
Nice.
If we could figure out, Justin's suggestion is a great one, if we could figure out a way to kind of run the page in a sandbox when you activate a plugin, then yeah, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. Yep. Amat has a follow-up question. It's maybe too long,
it's a long
to put
one
on the screen. Yeah, let's see.
But
it takes over the whole screen. The last part sounds good. Is it worth putting 20 hours a week to help make development better for WordPress and bring other JavaScript in the WP community? I happen to think it's possible post-Gutenberg.
Yes, and it's a good chance to thank you, Ahmad, for putting together the Gutenberg thing. Like, it's really cool, and I've seen it be like the intro for a lot of people into kind of learning what Gutenberg is. So it's an awesome contribution to the community.
Nice. Bradley Kirby, is the expectation that every block, including custom, would support CRUD through the REST API?
Yes, I would say that. I mean, maybe not all the letters of CRUD, but whatever is needed for the functionality of the block should go through the REST API. It's also good to start thinking about how these things work offline. Yeah, so when it's not connected to the web, like how should the blocks work and how should they interact? That'll be useful both for maybe doing Gutenberg offline in the future, but also for the mobile apps, which by default also support offline and are getting Gutenberg support. So, I mean, that's also a huge thing, just the idea that these blocks will be accessible in the mobile apps. That means that we'll have some form of plugin support in the mobile apps, which we've literally never had before in the history of WordPress. Or I can't even think of any other CMSs that do that. So we're definitely paving some new territory here, but I think it's possible and going to be kind of awesome, because I imagine everyone watching this and all of your clients probably has a smartphone. So WordPress being the full experience there just puts us light years ahead of other CMSs.
Nice, for sure. I got about 2 minutes till the 50-minute mark, which is what I told you we'd be trying to keep to.
Okay.
We got a couple more questions. I don't know if we'll be able to get them all in. Elizabeth Schilling says, love to hear more about the Gutenberg vision for the future.
Well, I'll just repeat. Phase 1 is the editor and making this new block-based editor. Phase 2, we take those blocks and put them in the customizer. And then phase 3, the world, there's rainbows and unicorns and themes and plugins can really, we start to see like the Cambrian explosion of what happens when people have these primitives they can build on, right? Because as great as all the site builders are, especially if they're paid, they only have tens of thousands of users. So it's not something that if you're building a plugin or theme for WordPress, you can really build on. But this will be in core, which means that everything that's built on WordPress will be able to take advantage of all this new functionality.
Ross has a great question. How will the WP.org plugin review team cope with an influx of new plugins using more JS technology? There's already hundreds of plugins in the queue. Is there a plan for this? Yeah, I mean, the plugin review team might be very PHP savvy and not as JS savvy, perhaps. Who knows? It's a good question.
And the answer is I don't know. So I'll follow up and talk with them about that because I'm not sure what their plan is. And I didn't realize that we were hundreds behind right now. Usually we keep the queue a lot lower.
Yeah, I typically also see it around maybe 40 at the max. Let's see. I think everybody here has asked questions. Oh, wait, here's a new one. From Paul Byrne. Is there going to be deep links between blocks and widgets? I have a plugin that has a tiny MCE form that generates a shortcode that is shared with the widget form. So I'm trying to work out how to support Gutenberg and keep supporting widgets without two code bases. I think kind of addressed this already, but
yeah, you'll be very happy because widgets essentially go away and you'll just have to write a block and it'll work in widgets as well. So imagine widgets all being replaced by blocks. I also see David asked, like, am I happy with Gutenberg right now? Or how happy am I? Pretty happy with the progress, but not ready to release. But I will say, like, it's really ready for a wider usage. So I've heard of, I think 10up and others are starting to build client sites with Gutenberg. Especially if you're working on something that's going to take more than a few months, build it with a Gutenberg plugin like today. And then you're skating to where the puck is going to go. And you can train your clients on how Gutenberg works today, which is largely how it's going to work when it's released. Like, it's going to be a lot more polished, but the basics are there and aren't going to change a ton. So if you're developing or if you're kind of training people for something that's going to launch April or later, I would say put them on Gutenberg now.
Okay, I'm going to do this last question for now, folks. We're going to wrap it up because Matt has been very generous with his time. David Tiny Fever. I'm not sure if that's a real name, but what waves and changes might be expected in the plugin and theme ecosphere after Gutenberg rolls live?
Well, I'll tell you our hope, and part of the reason we're doing this whole thing is that right now many plugins and themes have kind of their own way of doing the same thing, right? Of doing page building, of having kind of short code messes or custom HTML, or like using custom post types for a lot of things that probably aren't needed, to be honest, or meta boxes for things where it's not really needed. And the hope is that the big shift when Gutenberg is out there, really when blocks are out there, is that people can start to build these reusable blocks, and users can learn the interface once and then apply it lots and lots of places. So it will serve as a multiplier effect on development, where before, we have 20 or 30 themes kind of reinventing the wheel every single time. They'll be able to take this wheel we're giving them, Gutenberg, and then build on top of it and do something, take what they would have done, like building the basics of like columns and block navigation, and block manipulation, and put that time into something else. And the cool thing is, I don't know what that other thing is going to be. We'll see. But I just know that the incredible creativity and drive of the WordPress community that brought us to where we are today will just be that much better when we kind of have this basic new baseline that people can build on top of, a foundation that people can build their homes and buildings on top of.
Nice. Absolutely. Yeah, it's great. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all happens. And Matt, I really appreciate your time so much for coming and doing the AMA with us. I think it went really well. We had some great questions. We're happy to have you as a member, and of course, as somebody leading the WordPress community in this way. So,
I guess in closing, let me say thank you to the group as well. Like, I really appreciate, I follow the discussions occasionally, and I really appreciate the passion and time that you all invest in this. And I also appreciate y'all keeping an open mind on the Gutenberg stuff. The early threads were kind of rough, and the later ones, especially recently, have been like ultra positive. And it's been really exciting to see this community embrace Gutenberg, because I think y'all are going to be a huge part of making its adoption as successful as possible.
Nice. Appreciate that. Cool. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We're going to wrap it up, and maybe we'll do something cool like this again in the future if you all liked it. Thanks again so much, Matt.
Yeah, great job, Matt.
See you all later. Thank you.
Bye.